for started. The other thing I would just want to mention is that we want this to be very interactive. But at the same time, we want it to be very measured and controlled. So we ask that you put your mic on mute if during the presentation. After the presentation, there will be a Q&A section. So I strongly recommend that during the presentation, take some time, take some notes, have your questions. There will be, or comments, there will be a section in this presentation that we will have opportunity to ask questions. You can throw your questions in the chat, or you can ask them by just unmuting. You can speak by just unmuting your mic. So without further ado, we're going to get started. Like I said, today's session is on project leadership and delivery roadmap. Some of the things we want to take away from today's session is around how do I lead a project? Now, maybe I'm not leading the project. Where do I start from? If I get on the project today, if we need to start a project today, where do I start from? What are some of the things I need to do? How do I navigate? Because a lot of people want to get into project management, but the biggest challenge people have is how do you navigate? Now, I know this stuff. I know RAID log. I've done some project planning. I've done financials. I've done all these different things. How do I navigate when I get on the job? Because again, when you get on the job, you need to figure things out. Whether or not you're the lead or you're in a support capacity, there's a general understanding or know-how required for you to be able to navigate and ensure that you're, again, not just being able to get on the job and secure the job. There's one thing to secure the job. There's one thing to just being able to navigate. So we'll talk about all of that. So first thing we're going to talk about before going to the whole project leadership concept is, what is a project? A project, as I assume everybody on the call should know, a project is a temporary endeavor to produce a unique product or service. So project is essentially most temporary. If it's an ongoing thing, then it's become an operational activity, so it's no longer a project. A project should have a start and end date. Okay. So some of the key drivers of a project drive change in an organization. Project aims to move an organization from one state to another. And for example, we could say we want to ensure automated service delivery in some areas of our business versus telling people to come in person to get certain things done or sign up for something. Can we develop an online system where people can go sign up online and everything is automated, and it changes the outlook of the business? That's one example. People have talked about back in the day, you would want to perform a transaction, you have to go to the bank. Whereas now in today's world, you could log into your online banking. You don't need to leave your home. You can perform a transaction. Those are things, projects, some of the results you can get from a project. Okay, so now the question is, where do projects come from? What's the idea of a project from an organizational standpoint? Now let's think bigger picture. Now let's think from an organizational context. Now from an organizational context, often within an organizational context, and if you can follow my mouse here, you have business ideas, and those business ideas coming from a project. So, if anyone has gone through the intro session, we talked about portfolio management. Now, the concept of projects come from different, look at from a bigger organizational context. You might say the marketing department, HR department, all the different departments, finance department, they all have pain points. And all these pain points within their groups, they come up with ideas or projects that will address those pain points. So those projects within the bigger organizational context would be put into a portfolio of projects. Now, within that same organizational context, portfolio management, one of the key part of portfolio management is prioritization. Now, the prioritization process within portfolio management allows you to fund only projects that aligns with your current strategic objective. Now, maybe this year our focus is on customer-centric, winning more customers, getting more customers to sign up. Now, the project that will win in this case will be those projects that has to do with online registration. Maybe a project, there might be other project that talks about infrastructure. We might say, okay, maybe we'll do that next year. But right now, a pain point is to implement this customer online registration project. So those decisions will be made to fund. Now, some of the decisions, obviously, that also affects the prioritization and projects that get funded. Could be cost. You look at budgets. Maybe our budget for the year is, $10 million, and these projects, some of these projects are, over higher budget. So we only fund projects that, one, align with our organization's strategic objective, which is the primary, and then secondary is now looking at the funding component. So in this case, out of 7 projects, only 4 projects have been funded, and the rest is history, and which is what we're going to talk about in terms of, now that we've decided that the project has been funded, now we're looking at, for projects to be funded, first of all, every project that gets funded, there's a business case for the project. So the business case is your project justification. So we're looking at things like cost benefit analysis. Why do we implement this project? What are some of the incremental returns we're going to get? And it has to be practical, it has to be numbers driven, has to be smart. So the business case is the justification for your project investment. So for every project, there's a business case that is justifying why the organization should implement the project, and also presenting the organization or the decision makers, which is the executive for the most part, with some form of matrix or data that would inform why a project should be funded. So these are some of the basic things we need to talk about. Obviously, when we're talking about this project leadership thing, it goes beyond some of this basic stuff. But it's really good to also know. It's really good to put things into perspective, put things into context of where we're coming from. Let's understand the bigger picture. But now let's go into the fact that we understood what projects are. We've talked about where projects, how projects are being prioritized from an organizational standpoint, the portfolio management process. We've talked about that, and we talked about business case. We talked about how your business case is your project justification. Now that we have a business case, we have a project, let's go into the initiation phase. Now, the initiation phase is extremely important because the way your project is initiated has a tremendous difference in whether or not your project or subsequent activities in your project will be successful. So one of the key things we need to know as project managers or as project leaders, I think I kind of generalize things. I just want to think of everyone as project managers. I'm thinking as project leaders. You can be a business analyst, you're a project leader. You're a project manager, you're a project leader. So how do we initiate a project properly? What are some of the things we need to do? One of the key things you need to do is to, define and authorize new, I think one of the biggest piece when it comes to initiation of a project is your stakeholder management. Identifying the key stakeholders, communicating with them, alignment. One of the biggest key things you do when you're launching a new project is, first thing first, identify those stakeholders, have meetings with them. We're going to talk about some of those meetings that will take place. Then, most importantly is facilitate alignment, because if you have a project, every project depends on people. And when we work on projects that involves different stakeholder groups, we need to ensure that they're butting into what we're trying to do, because their support is going to be very critical. Their participation in your project is going to be very critical if you want to achieve the vision for that project. So some of the things you want to do, let's say, for example, you're new on a project and you've just landed that job. I mean, I feel like everyone in this program has the intent of landing a job. And let's just assume now you've landed that job, you've gone through the process, you've landed that job. First thing first, one of the key things we recommend that you do is understand. First thing first, you need to understand, what is this project objective? What are we trying to achieve with this project? Your sources of information are your business case. You can read the business case. We talked about the business case earlier, which is your project justification. There's some background information. Try to read some background about the project. Where's the pain point? Where's the issue? Why is the business trying to implement this project? Maybe there's some high-level requirements you want to study. Maybe there's a scope document you want to read. Maybe there's a project charter, depending on when you land on the project. In some cases, you land on a project, there's already a project charter. You'll study all that. Or alternatively, there might be an SOW or contract. A SOW simply is an acronym for statement of work. Often when there's an SOW, often what happens is there's an external vendor involved. So if there's an external vendor involved, maybe they'll be taking on a large share of the project. They'll be delivering a huge part of the project. Try to understand what they're supposed to be doing. What's the work that they're supposed to be doing? Who's the vendor? What are they going to be responsible for? Try to understand the scope of work and try to see how that fits into the entire scope of the project. So again, one of the key things you're doing, when again, part of key takeaways when you're trying to understand the project scope is to be able to manage expectations, of stakeholders, clients, so a good understanding of your project scope allows you to better manage the expectations. So we're going to get into the details. Again, this is just giving us some basics, some background information. Now, the real core aspect of this project leadership is where we're going to get to now. So again, if I'm new on a project, just note down, number one thing I want to do is to understand first. Read up on these project documents that we mentioned here. Try to understand the scope of work. Try to understand, the different work streams. Maybe there are multiple work streams. Try to understand first. And once I understand the project, my next step is to identify the key stakeholders. So I need to identify what are those key stakeholders? Who's the sponsor? I need to understand the sponsor. Who's the sponsor? Okay, I need to talk to resource managers. I need to identify who are my team leads. Who are the team leads? Who am I going to be working with on this project? What other stakeholder groups are being affected by this project? What department? Sometimes you can have a marketing project that is, that the sponsor is the head of marketing, but then this project might have an impact, the HR department. So you need to understand, by reading up on the project, reading up on the scope or the business case, gives you a better understanding of who's impacted, who's involved in the project, and you start touching base with those people, identify the leads and who's involved in the project, who's going to be working on your project. Now, the important thing about identifying these people is just one, simply introduce yourself and also try to understand their perspective. So we're going to take one step at a time here. So the first person I'm going to talk to, you want to take it from the top. The first person you're going to want to talk to is if you're the lead project manager, or maybe if you're the lead business analyst, the first person you want to talk to is the sponsor. That's the person paying for this project. Now, you might talk to, it could be the sponsor you're talking to, or it could be someone representing the sponsor, but you need to meet with the business. The sponsor, that's a business. Meet with the business. First of all, I need to let them know, introduce yourself. I'm the new project manager. My name is Ade. I'm the new project manager working on XYZ project. Try to understand, introduce yourself, and explain, let them know why you're meeting with them to understand what they're trying to achieve with this project. You want to communicate your understanding so they know that you know what you're doing. You're not just coming, you're not just showing up, and you're showing up to just try to get them to give you information. You want to at least, first of all, communicate your understanding, communicate what you've learned about the project, but then also make them know that as much as you've learned about this project and things that you've learned about the project, you also want to learn from here directly from them what they're trying to achieve with this project. And often when you give business stakeholders the opportunity to speak in that sort of environment, they're excited to share because it's a pain point. It's something that they feel they hold dearly to them. So you give them the opportunity to speak. Often when they speak, you also want to identify, as they're talking to you, you also want to identify or maybe ask the question, what are some of the main pain points you're looking to achieve or address with this project? So pain points really are areas of concern, areas of immediate business need that this project is going to solve. So it's really good to identify those areas because when your project is being implemented, you want to ensure that those areas are being prioritized and they're not being kept on the back burner, because that shows that you're a good project manager or business analyst. Because if you don't prioritize those things that the business consider a pain point, then they're probably not going to be happy with you because they want you to, give them things that will make them happy. So the other thing you want to ask is ask for things like what would represent a quick win. So they might say, well, a quick win for us would be if you can implement item 1 and 2 from the list of pain points that we've told you. So that it's an easy way to please the business, please the stakeholders. So identify what represents a quick win. So in having those conversations, you have a better understanding in terms of what the business is trying to achieve. Then you also want to show confidence. How do we show confidence? You need to communicate next steps. So to show confidence, I'm going to say, well, thank you so much for this meeting. This is amazing. I've learned a lot about this project, from talking to you versus what I read so far. This is amazing. In terms of next steps, I'm going to be talking to the team. I'm going to be talking to all the team leads to, just to kind of get things set up. Once we're done talking about, we're going to be talking about how we will be approaching this project. We'll be making decisions around the delivery approach. Generally, what I've learned is that Agile is what you guys use, but I'm going to talk to the team to get some ideas around what other approach can be used to ensure that we can deliver this project very quickly. So communicating next steps showcases your understanding, showcases that you're a pro and you know what you're doing. And it also gives the business or the sponsor confidence that, okay, this is a good project manager, because you're going to need them. You're not going to need the sponsor to help you facilitate things. Now that I've met with the sponsor, we're taking it from the top. The next thing I want to do is, figure out who are the people that are going to be working with me, because now the business told me their pain point. They've told me things that represent quick win. Who are those people that are going to be working with? Who's my BA? Who's my dev lead? Who are all these people? So find out, talk to people, talk to maybe your manager, find out who their resource managers are from all the different groups, identify them. What you want to do when you're meeting with the different leads, and the leads are the people that will do the work on the project. So we're talking about the people that will be following up, that will be doing the work that needs to be done. Maybe from the development side, they have like a team of 5 or 6 people, but they'll have a lead that's representing them. Maybe from the BA side, they have about the same number of people, but then they have a lead. Same as QA. So you want to have this meeting, you want to have meetings with these guys, preferably meet with your leads one-on-one. And the goal of meeting with your leads is to communicate the project objective, try to get clarity from their understanding. Okay, are you familiar with this project? Has anyone told you about this project? Okay, this is what we're trying to achieve with this project. You want to show charge, at the same time, you want to also be mindful, be very strategic, because this is your way to introduce yourself to the team. So listen, and also make sure that you're informed, and also try to use the opportunity to learn from them, especially if you're new in an organization. So get clarity in terms of their role. So my understanding is you're going to be the lead BA on this project. So, what do you know? What are your plans? From a delivery standpoint, try to understand what they're familiar with from a delivery. Is it Agile? What's the methodology? identify any constraints, any sort of constraints that they might have in terms of delivering. You want to note those constraints down, because a lot of people make assumptions that, okay, you're my lead, I have this expectation of you, but get clarity. So whatever expectation, whatever you need from them, get clarity. So you might tell someone that, okay, you're the lead, we're expected to do X, Y, Z. You might say, well, you know what, I'm working on 2 other projects. I can't give you guys 100%. I can only give you 50%. That is a constraint that you need to identify ahead of time. So you need to start talking to who you need to talk to see if there will be a backup or somebody else that can, you know, support them, so that your project doesn't track behind. So essentially, what you want to do is meet with all these different leads, get their perspectives. What tool do you guys use? Do you guys use Jira? Okay, SharePoint. Okay, great. You guys use what other tools do you use? Okay, you use Clarity, PlanView, or ServiceNow. You know, what do you use these tools for? What do you use to track your project? That helps you, gives you a good understanding of the landscape. Now, from the sponsor's perspective, you're learning more about what the business wants and what the business wants to achieve. Now, from the functional lead, when you're talking to the functional lead, you want to show that you understand some part of the project. You understand, based on your meeting with the sponsor, you want to at least showcase that, okay, this is what I learned from the sponsor, but I just want to know from their perspective, you want to understand the landscape. They will give you information about what sort of delivery methodology they use, what tools, what templates, how do they go about things. Reporting wise, you get a feel for it. Meet with people individually, because when you meet with people individually, there's a high chance that different people will tell you different things. And then you take it back as a lead, as a PM or BA, you take it back and then use that to decide what direction you're going to go with the project. Now, after having those individual meetings, you want to have a meeting with everybody together to discuss what you've learned, talk about what you're going to be doing, the approach, how we're going to be going with things, just to facilitate alignment overall. And in addition to meeting with your functional lead and managers, you also want to identify some other stakeholders that may be involved in the project. Is anybody involved from systems maintenance? Is there anybody from IT operations? Is anyone from data governance team? Is there a data project, maybe there's a subset of the project that involves data? So you might want to involve some of those people. So essentially, we're doing all this to have a better understanding of what's going on, and just to facilitate alignment so that everyone's aware of what's happening on the project and people can start getting excited about this project. Now, following what you've done, following those meetings, we talked about meeting with everybody, meeting with the team, talking about next steps. Obviously, when you're talking to people about next steps, you're talking about, well, our next step is to have a kickoff meeting, a project kickoff meeting, which is going to involve the project sponsor and all the key stakeholders. Everyone's going to identify their roles, yada, yada, yada. We kind of take it away from there. But project governance setup and tools. So one thing you want to do after meeting with the teams, after understanding the tools they use, you kind of have a sense of what the general approach will be on a project, what our methodology will be. Now we're looking at governance setup. When you talk about governance, we're looking at a framework in which authority is exercised within an organization. We're looking at what are some of the rules? How do we engage? What are rules of engagement? What tools are we going to be using? What sort of process are we following? So you want to go set up your governance processes. One, you want to set up your project in SharePoint. You want to set up a project in Jira. You want to establish your communication channels. What are some of the weekly status reporting? Maybe set up those meetings, start booking those meetings. Maybe you book it for the future. Maybe you book it for present. They depend on how quickly things are going to be running. Figure out all the different templates. What sort of templates are we going to be using for the different projects, artifacts that we need to create, like change requests? What kind of change request template or status report template? All those things you want to establish them ahead of time during your governance setup. In preparation, you want to set all this up in preparation for your kickoff meeting. So at the kickoff meeting, you already have your everything set up. One of the things you are trying to achieve with kickoff meeting is just to officially kick off the meeting. So everyone's already aware. We've had meetings, we've had several meetings, side notes, side chats here and there. But what you find at the kickoff meeting is just an establishment of what we're doing for this project. It's an official meeting. Everyone is on the call. You introduce the team. You know, you give the clients, you kind of introduce the team, the project and the team. You give the sponsor the opportunity to talk about, why they're trying to implement this project. It's always a good opportunity for the sponsor to talk about, meet the team and talk about why they're implementing the project, the history behind, some of the pain points they've had. Kind of give you an idea of the project scope, what we're trying to achieve with the project. Maybe some key milestones can be talked about, and then you can also introduce the team. You want to also introduce the team. Some of these things you have here, they don't have to necessarily follow any cadence, but you want to introduce the team, get people to introduce themselves, talk about their roles. Okay, I'm the lead BA on this project, or I'm the lead developer on our team. We have 5 people. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be working closely with the BAs to understand what they're trying to achieve. Once the BAs give us the go ahead and we have the approvals, the necessary approvals, we'll go ahead and implement. And part of our regular process is that usually there's a regular IT touch point before we go live with any project. We'll still go through that review process. So, someone that's a pro that knows they know what they're doing, they'll give you an update on how that approach, what that will look like, what that development work will look like, or maybe what that BA work will look like. During this call as well, you're going to be talking about what the delivery approach will be. Are we going with Agile, Waterfall? If whatever delivery approach you're proposing or you're presenting to the team, you need to provide your justification as to why we've decided to go with this delivery approach versus the other. And ultimately, what you want to do is to, communicate next steps. So as much as we've talked about all these things, we've talked about, okay, we're giving the sponsor the opportunity, we've introduced the project and the team, we gave the sponsor the opportunity to speak about why they're implementing the project. We gave the team also the opportunity to, introduce themselves, how they're going to be working. And we've also done some, introduction of our delivery approach. One thing you want to do is now keep the ball rolling. Talk about next steps. What's the next step? So in terms of next steps, we're going to be scheduling a planning session. The planning session will help us identify some of the key milestones involved in this project, and also allows us to come up with our delivery roadmap, which will guide how we do work going forward. You also want to communicate your communication channels. So there will be some weekly status meetings, or there will be some daily stand-up meetings that we'll be using to get updates. And you might also communicate, maybe there's a monthly executive meeting, communicate what dates that would be taking place and who's involved, maybe who needs to provide input into those meetings. You use this as an opportunity to communicate overall what we're trying to do. But following the kickoff meeting, we're talking about next steps, which is planning. Now, with planning, what you want to do is have a planning session. So some of the things you want to do, first thing first, when we look at after kickoff meeting, you want to schedule a planning session. Now, the planning session, the goal of the planning session is for you to come up with a delivery roadmap. So to come up with a delivery roadmap, you're not going to manufacture the dates yourself. So you need input from the team members. So it's a collaborative effort. So we're talking to the BAs to understand when they're starting their work, the piece of work. Okay, when you guys are going to be starting? Okay, you're starting on this date. Okay, great. How long is it going to take you? We figure out the start and end date. And then we're talking to the other guys to understand. So what you're doing essentially is to identify key milestones, just like what we have on the screen right now. Identify key milestones and come up with your delivery roadmap. Now, following this meeting, some of the things you can do, you want to do is, because this meeting is sort of like high level, you're coming up with key milestones, you're coming up with the dates for those key milestones. Following this meeting, what you want to do is essentially what you want to do following this meeting is, work closely with your team leads to gather details of the activities that roll up underneath all these different milestone items. So your team leads will then come up with the details of activities, and that becomes the makeup of your project schedule or project plan. Now, we're looking at this as an example project plan. Now, if I go back one more time, just to give us an idea. Now, we have a planning session. The goal of the planning session is to identify key milestones. Those key milestones would then help you determine your delivery roadmap. Now, keep in mind, one thing I didn't mention earlier is that with the key milestones, there's also an aspect of it that involves keeping in mind the interdependencies involved in the project. So, for example, for this one, the output of this piece of work becomes an input into the next deliverable. Now, even though this becomes an input into the next deliverable, I don't have to, now let's say this is requirement, this is design. The design guys don't have to wait for requirements to be completed before they can start. So what they might ask is, okay, when do you think your use case will be signed off? Once the use case is signed off, we can start working. So there's an interdependency here. Now, similarly, from a design perspective, the development doesn't have to wait for the entire design to be completed before they start. So they might say, well, when do you think the first batch of your design work will be approved? So if we guesstimate when that's going to be approved, development can start with an approved design. So, but obviously this is taking into consideration the traditional waterfall approach. Now, within an agile framework, all these things are totally different because everyone's working collaboratively based on what's being delivered at every given point in time. Now, essentially, as we're going through this exercise, essentially, as I mentioned earlier, the goal is to come up with a delivery roadmap and your project end date, and which obviously, as we talked about it, we're going to be reaching out to the team. Maybe perhaps after this planning session, I'll create, maybe this could be a whiteboard session or a session that we're just documenting things virtually. I draft something like this and I share with the team, get them to buy in. Now, key critical step here is, as much as people tell you, they give you the date on the call, you still need their written buy-in. So you send them an email, send an email to everyone. Hello, everyone. For our discussion today, here's the high-level milestone. Please review and provide your buy-in. Once they buy in, I need your authorization that the date is fine with you. Once they confirm, I'm reaching out back to them to give me the details of the activity. So if the BS confirmed that the date is fine, I'm going to reach out. I need the details of the activities that will be taking place here. This is just high level. And once you get the details, then the details will make up what you would have in your project plan or your project schedule, which should then become a detailed activity which captures all the detailed activities that will be involved in the project, that helps facilitate the tracking and reporting exercise involved in the project, because that's when we start going on a week in, week out basis, because we know what needs to be delivered. We're looking on a week in, week out basis. What's the status of this? Was how much of it has been completed? What's outstanding? Things of that nature. We're almost at the tail end here. Now, we talked about the waterfall method. Let's talk about the agile. So within an agile framework, now we're looking similar approach, but quite different. It's slightly different. Now, within an agile framework, you want to take things from a product roadmap, your product vision. So for example, within this new application we're building, what are the different modules involved? Or what are the different components? How do we break them down into work streams? So work stream one could mean that we're building this customer portal. or we're building this student portal. And work stream 2, we're building this admin dashboard. Or work stream 3, we're building, those, and within each portal or dashboard, what you find is there are multiple modules in there that can now be broken down into different sprints. So let's say, for example, this is the admin dashboard. And within the admin dashboard, we also have some other modules involved. So each of all the different modules can then be broken down into multiple sprints. So you can see in this case, there are like 5 sprints. Now, each sprint is also broken down into key features. Within a sprint, there are multiple features that we're implementing. So which gives us a breakdown of the planning. So again, from an agile perspective, your starting point is to have a product roadmap meeting where we identify the key, the different functionalities or different components of a project that can now form into releases. You look at that first, and then we now say, okay, based on what we know, let's start with the admin dashboard, for example, because admin is often the starting point for most applications, depending on what type of application it is. So let's start with admin dashboard. Let's now look closer into the admin dashboard and break them down into different sprints. And then you start having sprint planning session. Now, one thing I didn't mention is product backlog. Again, this is not an agile session, so I'm not going to go into the details of it. Product backlog also helps when it comes to your sprint planning. But then you can learn more about product backlog in the agile session, agile playbook session. And yeah, so that's now once we figure out what sprint, this is what a typical sprint will look like in Jira. You have your to-do, you have the in progress, you have maybe items in testing and the ones that are done. So this is kind of like your typical after, project delivery roadmap, which gives you an idea on what's going on a daily basis when you have your daily stand-up, while reviewing what's in progress, while reviewing what's in testing, and you're also taking a look at some of the items that are coming up in the to-do list. And finally, what you want to do, obviously, post-planning. After your planning, we talk about planning, and then we talk about the planning from both Agile and Waterfall. Post-planning, what we're doing is tracking and reporting, status reports, daily and weekly status meeting, daily stand-up or weekly status meeting, executive reporting, issue resolution, issue identification, issue resolution. You have to be, look ahead, start asking questions, look deeply. Don't just listen to what people say. Make sure that it's making sense. Alignment with governance processes. So keep in mind, within most organizational contexts, you need to also align with established governance processes. IT governance is key. There's some things that we won't mention here, but they're specific to organizations that ought to be completed. As you're focusing on delivery, you also want to ensure that you're also mindful of how and the organizations do things when it comes to project delivery. And lastly, continuous improvement. So just ensuring that you're finding ways to improve the way you're doing things, and you're also conducting a sprint retrospective where the team will meet after each sprint to review or take into consideration what went well, some of the areas of improvement, and find and adopt those things, those lessons learned in subsequent sprints. And I think that's about it, guys. In terms of recap, we've covered quite a bit. It's quite a condensed session, but has some valuable information. We talked about understanding, again, project leadership. We talked about some things earlier in terms of what is a project, portfolio management, where do projects come from, how do you prioritize. But some of the key things we're talking about when it comes to project leadership is when you're landing on a project today, how do you go about it? First thing first is make sure you understand first understand what needs to be done, understand the project scope. We give examples of sources of information to identify your key stakeholders. Who are those key stakeholders? We talk about your sponsor, your team leads, or technical SMEs, and other key stakeholders. Identify them, have one-on-one meetings with these guys. Try to understand. Again, the goal is to ensure that you can buy in, let them buy into your project, facilitate that alignment across the board. We talked about identifying and setting up your governance processes. Again, when you start meeting with your leads, you understand what sort of tools and processes that they have in place. Set that up prior to your kickoff meeting. And your kickoff meeting, you introduce everybody, the process, give the sponsor the opportunity to speak, talk about what we're going to be doing. Again, part of ways to kick off your project is extremely important to ensure that these things are done. And then, we talk about planning, and then in the reporting. So planning exercise is extremely important. As well as we may have done all those things, the first 4 items, if you don't plan properly, you're in trouble. But obviously we expect that what we're doing in this program, we're raising project superstars, masters of project management. So we expect that as you're going through this, this will serve as lessons learned and equip you for the job market. So on that note, we'll now open I guess the meeting for questions. Anyone, if you have any questions or comments, I'm going to go through what's in the chat first, and then if there's anyone that has anything else to add, we can then address them. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat. If you have any comments as well, this is a great opportunity. So I see, first of all, I'm going to just pause the recording.